The gospel lesson comes from Luke 24, verses 13 through 35, and it's about the story of the road to Emmaus. On that same day, 2 disciples were traveling to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking to each other about everything that had happened. While they were discussing these things, Jesus himself arrived and joined them on their journey. They were prevented from recognizing him. He said to them, "What are you talking about as you walk along?" They stopped, their faces downcast. The one named Cleopas said, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who is unaware of the things that have taken place there over the last few days?" He said to them, "What things?" They said to him, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth. Because of his powerful words and deeds, he was recognized by God and all the people as a prophet. But our chief priests and our leaders handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the one who would redeem Israel. All these things happened 3 days ago, but there's more. Some women from our group have left us stunned. They went to the tomb early this morning and didn't find his body. They came to us saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who told them he is alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found things just as the women said. They didn't see him." Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, your dull minds keep you from believing all that the prophets talked about. Wasn't it necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then he interrupted them for the things written about himself in all the scriptures, starting with Moses and going through all the prophets. When they came to Emmaus, he acted as if he was going on ahead. But they urged him, saying, "Stay with us. It's nearly evening, and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. After he took his seat at the table with them, he took the bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Their eyes were open, and they recognized him, but he disappeared from their sight. They said to each other, "Weren't our hearts on fire when he spoke to us along the road and when he explained the scriptures for us?" They got up right then and returned to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying to each other, "The Lord really has risen. He appeared to Simon." Then the 2 disciples described what had happened along the road and how Jesus was made known to them as he broke the bread.
People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down. When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're strange.
Now that's a strange song. People are strange when you're a stranger. Being a stranger is tough. I remember I think it was 1969, I was traveling around North Dakota, South Dakota by myself, picking up seed racks a day in and day out. And that song was an important one to me, especially on a particularly rainy day when I couldn't find the hardware store that had the seed rack. Anyway, we have a tough time with strangers because they're strange. And in the church, we have a difficult time because, well, I like people to come in here who are like us. But strangers come in and they don't know how it works. We do a lot of things by habit. We had some friends visit about my first sermon when I was in seminary. Some friends came to church to hear me preach. And they weren't churchgoers. So between wrestling with the kids and balancing the hymnal and the bulletin and trying to keep up with the service, they were kind of lost. They were strangers. And they were just visitors. You know, at the Rick Warren Saddleback Church in California, they don't have visitors. They refuse to have visitors. They call those who come once or very occasionally, they call them guests. You're a guest. There's a huge difference between being a visitor who just comes and temporarily and a guest, because we invite a guest into our homes. We don't expect the guest to do anything unless they want to help out. We do everything we do the best we can for the guest so that they may become one of us. Jesus on the road pretended to be a stranger. The disciples didn't recognize him, and I'm not surprised they didn't, because they may have seen him die on the cross. They certainly heard from some of their other friends that the body had been taken down from the cross and put in the tomb. And let's be honest, people don't come out of tombs. Unless they're talking about Lazarus. In that case, Jesus called him out of the tomb, but now Jesus is dead and in the tomb, and there's no Jesus to call him out. Looks a little like Jesus, but nah, can't be. But they visit with him. They welcome him, the stranger, as a guest, and they tell him their struggles, and he tells them so much more. Makes all the difference in the world. Jesus remembered, they remembered, that Abraham, 1,500 years before Jesus, had strangers come to his camp by the oaks of Mamre. And Abraham did not interrogate them. He did not ask them, where are you coming from? Where are you going? What are you doing? Show me your ID. He said, come, sit. Have a drink while I prepare a light snack for you. Light snack. It was the fatted calf. He gave them the best he had because they were guests. And everybody from the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews knew that this is what you do for strangers, because you never know. Stranger might be an angel, or Jesus made it even more personal than that. Every time you meet a stranger and make them a guest, you have done that to Christ. He said, you feed the hungry, you clothe the naked, you care for the ill. You know, nations that are afraid to feed the hungry, nations that are afraid to help those who have fallen through the cracks, nations that are afraid to make sure that everyone has health care, Jesus is going to judge them. Remember that story? He separated the sheep from the goats. Got to keep that in mind. We are called as Christians to move out of our natural xenophobia, fear of strangers. And it runs deep through our nation. At one time or other, our nation has been afraid of Catholics and Jews, Arabs, Irish, Orientals, blacks, Hispanics. Xenophobia, well, it just makes too much political hay for politicians to let it go. We've got to ramp up our fears of our strangers in our midst. But there's another word. It's called philoxenia, which means love of stranger. And this is what we are called to be by Jesus Christ. Even he is the stranger looking for acceptance and care. And you know what happens when we practice philoxenia? We discover that those strangers aren't so strange after all. That's strange. At that Saddleback church, they make sure that there is a greeter out in the parking lot. They make sure that a greeter is right at the door who welcomes everybody who comes through. And they make sure that the ushers, the very first thing they do before the person walks into the sanctuary, is welcome people. Welcome strangers. You have had 3 contacts and people caring for you before you ever sit down in a pew and hear the preacher. And that tells more than the preacher could possibly say out loud. You belong here. You are our guest. Years and years ago, when we moved to Ogden, Utah, before I went in the ministry, we were going to go church shopping. We had several churches to look at, and we first of all started the one the farthest from us, far end of Ogden. We went in there, sat down, and the people in the pew in front of us turned around and started talking to us like we were old friends, like we'd always been there. We were welcomed as guests. And we didn't ever look at another church. It didn't take us long to become family. That's what Jesus is talking about. As they're walking down the road, they get to Emmaus, and Jesus makes to go on down the road. He's just wondering what they're going to do, and what they do is the right thing. They say, "Wait a second, the night's almost here. You're not going to get very far. Come on in. Spend the night with us. Be our guest." And then they invite him in. They have food. They put food out on the table. And they share it. And then Jesus turns the tables because he puts the shawl over his head, and he reaches out and takes the bread, gives thanks to God, and then he breaks it. And that's when they recognize him. In that breaking of the bread, we come to see Christ. It's all through Scripture. Remember the feeding of the 5,000, what happened? Jesus broke the bread. He gave it to the disciples to pass out. In the breaking of the bread, we know Jesus Christ. And we know him even more than that. Jesus comes into our lives as a stranger. I know he's a stranger for a lot of people because they've never met him. In order to meet him, we have to be open and let him be a guest in our lives, that he might become the host in our lives, the one who makes us the guest, who loves us and cares for us as we care for others. Jesus, the host. You know, the Catholics even call the bread, communion bread, they call it the host. Because this is Jesus for us. We come down here, some places you come down to the altar for an altar call, and you let go of everything in the way and you accept Jesus into your life. We come down here and we do the same thing. You let go of everything in your life that's in the way, and you partake of the body and the blood, the bread and the wine. And Jesus is within you in a spiritual way. Your host, your strength, your salvation. Stranger, guest, host. It works both ways.